So we were talking about last week about our brethren, the Ethiopian Jews, and who knows, maybe we are seeing the actualization of a prophecy by Yeshayahu. It talks about in the end, but Mashiach times, V'haya b'yamahu Yosef Hashem shenis yodai liknot eshar amei. It will come a time that God will once again gather up the second time all of his remnants, Ashishah me Ashur, mi Mitzrayim, mi Pasartes, mi Kush. Even the Jews that are in Kush. So Kush actually means the Africans, so the South Africans think it's referring to them. But it could be that's referring to who? The Ethiopians, and we are seeing an actualization of Nevuah, and hopefully this will bring the Mashiach. V'nasa neis lagoyim, v'asaf nitche Yisrael, v'nefutzeis Yehuda, yikabeis me'arba kanfeis ha'aretz. So we are definitely seeing at least a beginning of this Nevuah. So we were trying to figure out last week, what are the origins of the Ethiopian Jews? How are they Jewish? How they ended up there? So just to recap, we have they came from Malka Shiva and Shlomo Melech, but we're not going to talk about that at all anymore because none of the Svarim or the Jewish sources bring that at all, that they come from Shlomo and from Queen Sheba. So we can forget about that for halachic purposes. Then we said something about they came from Moshe, and Moshe's children sort of got together with Dan, and they sort of left Eretz Yisrael. And last week I tried to show how could such a thing be understood from the verses, not that I believe that's the truth. I'm just saying if you put together this story and that story and that story, to put them together, we can see where such a legend comes from. But again, in the Halachic Svarim, no one talks about this. Moshe Rabbeinu, and no one talks about that at all. So what we saw at the end of last week was Eldad Ha-Dani. That already is brought down. Eldad Ha-Dani was we saw last week that he just came out of nowhere, a dark-fellowed guy. He had a funny Hebrew, and he brought other books. He had chronologies, and he has halacha books, and we said that Eldad Ha-Dani says that we come from Dan, not when the 10 tribes were lost, which is 150 years before the first Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, right? We know the story. The first Beis Hamikdash was 400 years, basically 410. The last 150 years, the 10 tribes were destroyed. No, way before that. When's way before that? When there was a civil war between Yeravam and Rechavam. It was a bloody civil war. It wasn't good. According to the Navi and Divrei, hundreds of thousands of Jews killed each other. And Dan said, we are not picking sides. We don't want to fight with Yeravam. We don't want to fight with David. We don't want to have anything to do with this. They packed up their bags and left. So the whole contingency of Dan, I don't know if it's all of Dan or part of Dan, said we're out of here. And they said they went back to Mitzrayim. He was very fastidious over here. We didn't go back to Mitzrayim the way we came because that's not allowed. We went a roundabout way because you're not allowed to go back to Mitzrayim. And then from there we went to Cush, and that's where we are until this day. So that is Eldad Ha-Dani. So that's our first halachic source of where the Ethiopian Jews may come from. So what do we have from the 1500s and from that time? So we have two tshuvas from the Rabbi. The Rabbi lived in the 1500s. He was a prolific writer. He has thousands of tshuvas, very famous. He was a Rav in Mitzrayim, and he's actually ended up in Tzfas, and he could go to his keres in Tzfas. He was in the times of Beis Yosef. They were contemporaries. So the Rabbi deals with the Ethiopians. This is in the years late 1400s, beginning 1500s, and he brings here, someone sent him a question. What was the question? He said, Rabbi, I just bought an Ethiopian. There was an Ethiopian on the slave market, and I just bought him. And I want to know, do I have to let him go out after 6 years? I learned in Yeshiva, in Kedusha, we learn all about Eved Ivri, all the laws. He goes out 6 years, you got to treat him very well. Could he marry a Shifcha Kanaanis? All the different laws. He says, Rabbi, please give me a list, the rules of Eved Ivri. So the Rabbi writes back, he says, I want to congratulate you. Why? Oh yeah, why? You do not have an Eved Ivri. What you have just done is a mitzvah pidyon shvuim. That guy is totally free. That Ethiopian that you redeemed is totally free. You can't buy a Jew off the slave market. A Jew could only sell himself a Jew could only be sold by a Bezdin if he steals, or a Jew could sell himself through his own volition. There's no concept of a Jew being captured and then another Jew buying him and he becomes an Eved Ivri. So he says, oh, I'm so jealous of you, wonderful. You just did a big mitzvah, pidyon shvuyim. This guy thought he had himself an Eved Ivri. Then he talks here, well, does he owe you money? Does he not owe you money? He gets involved in all that. That's what he says. So what do we see here? Clearly a Jew. Now, the Rabbi continues. The Rabbi says, you know what? He sort of takes a step back. He sort of backtracks. He says, I know for sure that those Ethiopians are for sure Jewish, and they come from Dan. But I have a little bit of a problem. They act like Karaites. They act exactly like the Karaites, right? From Saduk, Ubaisos, and Anan. And you know what? Maybe you didn't do a mitzvah. Maybe you actually did an Avera. Why? Because we know for certain groups of Jews, especially the Karaites and people who are minim, do not believe in Torah at all, there's no mitzvah to be opposed to them. And there's no mitzvah to try to even save their life. Actually, Maridin v'loy Ma'ilin even. So even though I congratulated you and said, wow, I'm so jealous that you did a pidyon shvuyim, now he hesitates. Maybe you didn't do a pidyon shvuyim. Maybe you shouldn't have saved him at all. But then the Rabbi says, no, it is true they act like Karaites. That is true. They do not keep Torah Shabbat Peh. That is true. Right? But Karaites, you're not supposed to save. Then you're not supposed to offer sustenance. Because the Karaites live amongst the rabbinic Jews, what he calls the rabbanim Jews, and they make fun of them, and they abuse them. The Karaites make fun of the regular Jews, the rabbinic Jews, and we try to educate them, and they don't listen. So those guys, those Karaites, definitely there's no pidyon shvuyim. But these guys, the Ethiopians, what do you want from them? What do you want from them? They're stuck in the middle of Ethiopia. They had absolutely no education. They had no one to direct them, no one to instruct them, right? And certainly, if someone would have been there to teach them, they would have accepted all of Torah Sheba'al Peh. And they are like the famous Tinik Shenishba. What's a Tinik Shenishba? The Gemara talks about Tinik Shenishba. A child gets kidnapped, and he never had any Jewish education. So clearly, there's a mitzvah to save him, even though the child knows nothing. The child knows nothing, doesn't know Shabbos, doesn't know nothing. Clearly, there's a mitzvah to save the child, even when he gets into adult, because what do you want? He doesn't believe in it because he wasn't educated. He never had the chance to learn about it. So he says, it is a mitzvah pidyon shvuyim. Is there like Karaites? They're not like Karaites. Because the Karaites, on their own volition, decided to leave normative Torah Judaism. These guys, the Ethiopians, had no education. You can't blame them. And he says, I know they're not really from the Karaites, because when did the Karaites, where did these Karaites come from all of a sudden? If you know a little history, they came in the middle of the second base of Mikdash. And these Ethiopians were way before the second base of Mikdash. They're from Yeshivat Ohr. So they have nothing to do with the Karaites. So therefore, congratulations, you've done a wonderful mitzvah of pidyon shvuyim, and I'm envious. That's what the Rabbi says over here. Okay? Great. So this Rabbi says it's Jewish, no question about it. We have another Rabbi, like I said, he wrote thousands and thousands of Jews. It's amazing. He has here another question. The question was like this. There was a man who bought an Ethiopian slave. Again, when I say Ethiopian, I mean the Chabashim. Again, according to this, he shouldn't have done it. But that's what it was. He bought him. I mean, he shouldn't have retained his ownership. But that's what it was. And she came with 2 kids. And the guy who bought her, his name was Reuven. And she came, and Reuven bought her. And we asked her who you are. She said, yeah, I was married. These are my 2 kids. And our town got destroyed. It was pillared, it was pillaged. And everyone got killed. and I got captured, and I'm a Jewish. And they said, okay, that's what happened. And for years, Reuven was taking care of her. I don't know if Reuven kept her as a slave or just took care of her. At the end of the day, it seems that Reuven misbehaved, and she got pregnant from Reuven. No. And a kid was born, and the kid says, I want to join Klal Yisrael. He wanted to get married. So again, Reuven basically bought a slave, an Ethiopian Jewish slave, and he acted misappropriately, lived with her, and that was the story. And they were the kid. The kid wanted to marry into Klal Yisrael. Well, so he gets involved here. The famous halacha, we know that a married woman who lives with another man is cardinal sin, right? That's very bad. And the kid is a mamzer. But we know that if a married woman says, my husband died, we believe her. Even one married woman comes in and says, yes, I was married. We knew she was married, even though we knew she was married. She said, my husband died, we believe her. That's the famous Gemara. But the Gemara says, when do you believe a married woman to say my husband died? Only if she didn't come from an area where there was war. If she came from a peaceful area. But the second she comes from an area that there's war, we don't believe her. Why? Because we think that she's surmising that her husband died. She's conjecturing. Even though she says black and white, no, I buried him, he died, I know he died, we don't believe her. So a woman, again, we're going about a woman we know who's married. If she comes back from vacation, where's your husband? You won't believe it, dead. Okay, we'll let her get remarried. Amazing, it's amazing, we believe her. I can't get involved, but that's a famous Gemara. Eid Echad believes in these cases for Aguna. But if she knows she went to some war-torn area, right? And then she comes back, where's your husband? Oh, dead, we don't believe her. Fine. So says the Baz, we cannot believe this lady. Again, this lady said, my husband died. So according to this lady's testimony, the kid is no problem, not a mamzer, because the husband's dead. He says, we can't believe her. Why? He says, because we know what's going on over there. We know what's going on in that area. Why? Because we know there's terrible wars in Ethiopia. And there are three kings, the Christians and the Ishmaelim and Muslims and Yisraelim from Yeshivat Dan. And they're always fighting with each other. And they're always killing each other. And they capture each other. There's a lot of capturing one to each other. And we know that those Jews are from Saduk and Baisus. Those Jews are Karaites. And we know that, since we know that for sure she's coming from a war-torn area, we can't believe her. And then he says, anyway, even if we didn't know she's from a war-torn area, how did she come? How did she get here? She was sold as a slave. So clearly, she was captured. So clearly, she comes from a war-torn area, even if we didn't know about it. So anyway, he leaves us hanging. He says, basically seems to be saying, we cannot, this kid is a mamzer. At least a Suffolk mamzer. Because we can't rely on this Ethiopian slave's testimony that she is unmarried, that her husband died. Now the Baz leaves us hanging over here. His student, actually, the famous Rabbi Yaakov Castro, says the Baz told the student, the Baz told this boy, again, the boy that was created through the connection of the Jew, Reuven, and the maidservant, that what should be? He should marry a Shifra Kanainis. We all know the famous Mishnah in the Kedushin, that if a mamzer can marry a Shifra Kanainis, so then he has a biological son. Now, they are not related halachically, because since the child's mother is a Shifra Kanainis, so basically the child is a semi-goy, but when you free that child, he becomes a Jew. So basically a mamzer it's called mitaher. A mamzer is able to purify his stock. How does he do it? He married a Shifra Kanainis. That Shifra Kanainis has a child. That child is freed. So basically he has a biological son that's a full Jew. He's luckily not a son. That's what happened here. But what do we have here from these two tshuvas? From the two tshuvas of the Baz, he says clearly they are Jewish. Clearly they are from Dan. He's equivocating, you're going to see soon, it's going to be very important. In one tshuva he says he doesn't think they're Karaites. In another tshuva, he says he thinks the Karaites. This is going to be a very important point. We're going to get to that in a minute. But about the fact that they're Jewish, no question. There's no question about it. Oh. So now, what do we do with all this in the year 2020 or 1950 when this all came to the fore? So, the Rav Yosef's Paskin, they are 100% Jewish. Every Ethiopian is 100% Jewish. You don't need any Geiris. You don't need anything. Right? Amazing. I read the whole tshuva. He doesn't even mention once, hey, don't you notice that they're black? Shouldn't that be some type of specter? Shouldn't that be like some type of indication? Nothing. Rav Yosef says nothing, no Geiris whatsoever. Nothing. He says that Rav Herzog, the famous Rav Rashi of Herzog, was tainted by what? By modern research. Because if you open up Wikipedia, you'll find that there's a whole school of thought that says Ethiopian Jews never happened. Never happened. They're all Christians, and the year 1500 around, a group of Ethiopian Christians decided to be more closer to the old Bible, to keep the Chumash. We can find nowadays Christians, some of them are more New Testament oriented, and some of them are more Old Testament oriented, right? The Seventh-day Adventist, right? He said that's what happened. There's a whole, the truth is that's what most researchers hold nowadays. I'm talking about not the Jewish research, I'm talking about the secular researchers. And somehow in the 1500s, a group of Christians, Ethiopians, decided they wanted to be more closer to the old Bible, and they're all Christians. So, Rav Herzog said, since there is this contemporary study, and says Rav Herzog, that even if the Rabbi, we accept the Rabbi what he says in the year 1500, this is 500 years later, right? There's a good chance that there was intermarriage, there's a good chance that they accepted Gerim that were not kosher Gerim, because let's say there was a kernel of Jews in 1500 that were Jewish, but then they accepted Gerim. We spoke about it a couple weeks ago that there's a whole process how to accept Gerim. If you don't do it the right way, they're not Gerim. So says the Rav Herzog, they're Suffolk Jews. You must do Suffolk, you got to do Tefillah, Mila. Now Mila obviously don't do Mila because they already did a bris Mila. So he says you do a toughest bris. You prick a little bit over there. And that itself is a whole big machlokes whether you even have to do that. But they're Suffolk. Rav Yosef went crazy. Rav Yosef said, how could you say that? How could you say that the Suffolk Jews? If the Rabbi says that they're Jewish, he says, tell me. There are many other communities. You know, Sephardim don't look like Ashkenazim. Clearly there was Geiris in the Sephardi community, and there's Geiris in the Ashkenazi community, right? That's why everyone has a little different shade over here, right? What's the reason? Because there was Geiris and there was Geiris, and we don't say, oh, maybe these Sephardim are not Jewish, maybe the Ashkenazim are not Jewish. We don't say. We say there was a kernel of Jews. They separated to different areas, and in each community they accepted Geirim. We don't start questioning it. So if the Rabbi says that they were Jews in the 1500s, how are you listening to some researchers, some contemporary heretics and researchers? How are you listening to them? What right do you have? And what right do you say, oh, maybe they were fine, they were Jewish in the 1500s, but there was intermarriage, and they married Geirim, and they did Geiris that wasn't kosher. You have no right. There's chazaka, and that's it. Rav is very, very stark about this. Now again, when I'm reading this, I'm like, they're black. They're very black. I mean, how did that happen? There must have been some type of intermarriage, some type of Geiris, and if it hurts, like makes sense. I mean, if they did Geiris, so it probably wasn't done the right way. But Rav he was offended. He took up he really fought for them. Okay, the truth is, Rav Moshe Feinstein says the same thing like Rav Herzog. He says the same exact thing. He says like this. He says, even though the Ritbaz says they're Jewish, but we can't rely on the Ritbaz. Maybe he didn't know the Metzias. Maybe he didn't know. Simple as all that. And then he says, and even if the Ritbaz did know the Metzias, maybe things change over 500 years. Intermarriage, Not kosher gerim they accepted. Now, Rabbi Omer quotes Rav Moshe and he goes to town. He says, how can you question the Rabbis? You don't know? You're saying maybe the Rabbis doesn't know what he's talking about? Which is going to be funny because we're going to see soon that Rabbi Yosef also says maybe he, in some area, the Rabbis may have not known the situation. But Rav Moshe, everyone paskins, they need Suffolk, Geiris, everyone. Rabbi Shlomo Zalman, Rabbi Yashu, Rabbi Herzog, everyone. And they all bring the research, and they say the same thing. We don't know if they were Jewish at all. Maybe they were never Jewish, like the contemporary research, and even if they weren't Jewish at one point. Well, we'll get to that in a minute. And maybe they were intermarriage, maybe they were Gerim, and they were secluded. Everyone says Suffolk Gerim. Okay. So, now, the truth is, in the 1980s, they did a DNA test. And they did find that if you take Sephardim Jews and you compare it to the DNA of the Gentile environs, the Gentile around them, their DNA is different. And if you take Ashkenazi Jews and you take DNA samples of the Gentiles around them, it's different. And not only that, surprisingly enough, the Sephardi Ashkenazi Jewish DNA is pretty similar, which I find surprising because definitely that we are different shades. There is a reason for that, right? But if you take the Ethiopian Jews and you compare it to the DNA of people around them, it's very similar. So it's not my point here. The point is to say that I hear where all the Rav Moshe and Rav Herzog, I would assume Rav Yosef would say the same thing. I don't care about DNA. We gave a shit about DNA. He didn't care about DNA. Strictly halachically, Rav Yosef is definitely correct in that sense. Strictly halachically. We have the Ritbaz, we have a Chazaka, that's it. We know, that's it. Don't start, maybe this, maybe that, maybe this. But I guess the other rabbis say we have to look at the facts on the ground. That's what it is. Now, so you're thinking here, Rav Yosef is advocating for the Ethiopians and he's, pride, Black Lives Matter, none of this business, no gayris. The truth is, we're going to see that what Rav Yosef wants is actually a little bit to their detriment. We're going to see it's a little bit to their detriment. Why is that? Now, I just wanted to add, I forgot to add something. Very important. Rav Moshe here in his tshuva says, amazing, it's astounding Rav Moshe. He says, okay, we're not too sure if they're Jewish, Suffolk Jewish, but since it's a Suffolk Jewish, you must save them, and the Suffolk Nefashis Lahakil, if you see someone on the street on Shabbos, and you're not sure if he's Jewish or not, Mechal Shabbos, no question about it, if you think that it's a chance that he's Jewish. So you've got to do your utmost effort to save them. He said something amazing. And he says, even if we found out they're not Jewish, you still got to save them. You got to get them out of Ethiopia. Ethiopia is a war-torn country. Every other day something else. People getting killed, they're starving. He says, why? He says, because, for hundreds of years they thought they were Jewish. And for hundreds of years, they sacrificed in many different ways to uphold their Judaism. So even if it was mistaken, it doesn't make a difference. You have a obligation to save them because they thought they were Jewish. And they fought for their Judaism even though it was mistaken. That's amazing. That's what he says there. Right? And then he says you better take care of them. Then he says he's very upset. He heard people there's this bigotry in Israel. He writes here. He says it's a terrible thing, and none of that. You must save them and you must supply them. He does say, if you know they're going to come here and they're not going to do geiris, then leave them there, because you're going to bring Gentiles here and everyone thinks they're Jewish. But he says, but don't worry about it, which is true. All of them want to become geirim. The original one that came on, so it's no problem. So here we have it. Rav Yosef on one side, for sure Jewish. Everyone else, Suffolk Jewish. You need tefillah, hatavat dam bris, kabbalah mitzvahs. No bracha. Obviously, you don't do a bracha. Right. Now, so the chayra we could say, it's a big deal. Everyone's happy. Suffolk Jew, not Jew. Then they become geirim and everything is good to go. Everyone agrees you have to save them, so we're good to go. The problem is the problems are just starting. The problems are just starting. Because I didn't read the end of the Ritbaz. in the end of the Rabbi, he says about the two tshuvas. He says one, he has a little bit of a contradiction, and we'll see why in a minute. He's talking about saving he's saying, yeah, you have to save that slave that you bought, that you think is an Eved Ivri, that you think he's going to work for you. He's indentured for 6 years. He's free, and you've done pidyon shvuyim, and they're not Karaites. They're just uneducated. He just says, I'm just afraid these guys can't marry. I'm very worried about who's this guy going to get married to. Shema kedushin v'gitim einen kitikin. Maybe their kedushin is a kedushin and their gets were not a get. I mean, he's saying like this. We know to get married, there's certain halachas, but it's pretty easy to do a kedushin, right? It's not that difficult. You know, you give her something, I want to marry you, 2 Eidim Azir. It's pretty easy. Gittin is an extremely complicated process, right? Gittin is an extremely complicated process. You got to know what you're doing 100%. So here we go. We have the B'nai Dan, Rabbi saying B'nai Dan. We're going like Avad Yosef, it's the shore Jews. They've been there for at least 2,000 years, maybe more, totally unconnected with mainstream Judaism. Isn't there not a very good chance that they got married, d'oraisa, and there probably was divorce, and their divorce is not kosher? So basically, you got, because I just explained that would you know how to write a divorce? Trust me, you wouldn't even know you wouldn't know where to hold the paper. You wouldn't know nothing. I wouldn't know nothing. You got to go to divorce school.
There's an amount of lines you have to have in the case.
Yeah, it's a very complicated process to write a divorce. Very complicated. You have to know what you're doing. So basically, says their Baz, save the Ethiopian Jews, but I don't know who they can marry. And the truth is, why? Like we just said, there probably are a lot of divorces that were done that were not kosher. So over 2,000 years, you got probably a lot of mamzerim running around. The ladies there got divorced, got married halachically, got divorced.
That's a Suffolk
right? A Suffolk mamzer. At least we have a Suffolk mamzer.
No, but it's the Vadi mamzer.
Oh, so Shammai learned Kedushin, but he didn't learn all the Kedushin.
Yeah.
So the halacha is a Suffolk mamzer is Asr Midrabanan. Suffolk mamzer is definitely Asr Midrabanan. Very strict. Suffolk mamzer is Asr Midrabanan. So, and not only that, they wouldn't be able to marry each other because Sveikim is Sveikim Asurim. If you learn, we learned Asar Yuxim, they can't even marry each other. So that's what he ends off over here. He ends off over here. He doesn't think they could get married into each other or anyone else. Now that's not good. That's not good, right? We can't have that. You're going to bring over 150,000 Ethiopians. And you can tell them, oh, by the way, guys, you can't marry anyone. And you can't even marry amongst yourselves. I mean, they can marry real gerim, they'll be able to marry. Right? Other gerim, because a gerim is a lot of marrying mamzer, right? That's the law. But that's Ritbaz number 1. Ritbaz number 2 is talking about, remember the case of, he's talking there also. He says, okay, this son of, we said that the master Ruvain sort of acted misappropriately with his shivcha. His son can't get married. Because why? Because maybe she's still married. But he says, what about the Karaites? Forget about the issue of maybe she was married. Forget about that. All of the Beta Israel, all the Ethiopians, aren't you worried that maybe they're mamzerim because their kedushin was a kedushin, and hence the gittin were in gittin, so there's a good chance of mamzerim? He says, no, we don't got to worry about that. Why? Because they're Karaites, and since they're Karaites, they can't get married because there's no kosher eidim. There's no kosher eidim. So you got nothing to worry about. You worry that the gittin not a gittin because it's like so complicated, and kedushin is so easy. But you do need 2 eidim, that much you do need, and they're not kosher. So we have here a stira in the Ritbaz.
So why is that kind of Suffolk mamzer?
No, it's not.
It's not a Suffolk.
Well, right. So let's put it on the 2 sides. It comes out like this, and this is going to get a little complicated. But the way it works is like this. In one Ritbaz, he seemed to say that they're not such bad people. The Beta Israel, we'll call them Beta Israel, the Chabashim are not so bad. Okay, they don't have Torah Shabbat Peh. What do you want from them? They had no education. They're not Karaites. There he says, oh wow, they're wonderful people. That's actually to the detriment. If they're wonderful people, it comes out they're kosher Eidim. So if they're kosher Eidim, there's a good chance that Kedushin was good because it's very simple to do Kedushin, but the Gittin, they messed up. So in this Ritbaz where he says that they're better people, they're not Karaites, he says, I'm very worried that they can't get married to anyone because they're Suffolk Mamzer. In this Ritbaz, which is the same author, over here he thinks to seem that they are Karaites. So in this Ritbaz he says, oh, the Karaites? You got nothing to worry about. They're not kosher for Eidim because they're terrible people. And since they're not kosher for Eidim, you got nothing to worry about. Kedushin, Gittin, they were never married, they were never divorced.
Why are we just assuming that they had Eidim?
Why? Why should they have Eidim? Usually when you get married, they had ceremonies.
It says in the Pasuk they can.
Wait a minute. I don't know the last time we went to the Chasana, but there's usually more than 2 people there. I mean, even if you're right, they didn't know. You're right. You're asking a good question. But you could assume that there were people by the wedding, right? They want the wedding presents, right? You want wedding presents, you got to invite the people, right? So you could assume that there was some type of ceremony by the Ethiopians. They probably gave something to each other or some sorts. There's a good chance that a Kedushin happened where Eidim saw it. There's a good chance. Okay. So these are the 2 worlds. Now, this really gets into the famous shaila of Moshe about whether Reformed Jews are kosher for Eidim. Are Reformed Jews, we're going to go here for a minute, are Reformed Jews kosher for Eidim? So you'll say, Reformed Jews kosher for Eidim? Anyone who learned a little bit of Sanhedrin knows who's kosher for Eidim? Only someone who's not over on any lavim. If you're over a lav, you're called a Rasha, and it says in the pasuk, "Al touches Yadcha Rasha Eid," right? Al touches Yadcha Eid Rasha, right? So it says here, if you're a Rasha, you're over a lav. So what's the Reform are over lav? They don't keep anything. What's the issue? Oh, the issue is because there's a famous Gemara there, and in Sanhedrin, the Gemara says there were some grave diggers, the Chera Kadisha, who used to bury people on Yontif. And the Papa said, you guys are Pasal Eidim, you're Mechal Yontif. And they said back, Yeshua said back, no, they're not Pasal for Eidim. Why not? They think they're doing a mitzvah. They think on Yontif you're allowed to bury someone. They think so. So the Papa said, well, we told them not that way. We put them in excommunication. So the Papa said, no, they don't believe us. They think that the process is like this. Grave diggers think you have to bury on Yontif, but since it's not the greatest thing, you have to be excommunicated to get some type of pardon. And then it's okay, meaning it's a little bit of a bad thing, but you're supposed to do it, and you get excommunicated, you get a pardon, and that's it. So the Gemara brings down here, basically, if someone is over a lav, but he thinks that it's okay, for whatever reasons, he thinks that it's okay, you could be a kosher aid. Rabbi Kiva Eger brings down that people who used to use razors are kosher for Eidim because they don't think it's such a bad thing. Rav Chaim Oizer said people in South Africa used to work on, they would keep their shops open. They wouldn't work on Shabbos, but they would keep their shops open on Shabbos. Rav Chaim Oizer said they're all kosher. Basically, anytime you could basically say someone thinks that it's not such a bad thing, you don't say the pasuk for Eidos. So now, Reformed Jews, if you open up a Rambam, the Rambam famously says that even if you want to say a min and a mummer, they're terrible people, and you're supposed to not help them, you're not supposed to have any connection with them. Again, people who do avodah zarah, and people who deny Torah shebeksav, Torah shalpeh. But that's only, says the Rambam, the first generation. That they wantonly went on their own volition. They decided to chuck everything. They had a yeshiva education, and they decided that they don't want to have anything to do with it. But the children that are born into those families, no, you can't blame them. The Tinnik Shenishba, and even though they've seen Orthodox Judaism, you can't blame them. Basically, Rambam says Reformed Jews, the kids of the Reformed Jews, basically everyone nowadays, they're all Tinnik Shenishba. They're all Tinnik Shenishba. You can't blame them because they were educated this way, and since they were educated this way, you have to try to help them. You have to try to say, You have to try to be good to them. The Tinnik Shnishba. So, there's some. So, if you put it all together, a Reformed Jew, should it be kosher for Eid? So you have a wedding, 2 Reformed Jews are the Eidim. Should it work? Well, if you put all the pieces together, it seems yes. Why not? They're not keeping anything. The Reformed Jews are not keeping anything. Yeah, they're not keeping anything, but they're not doing it on purpose. They're not doing it willfully. They have no education. So just like the grave diggers are considered kosher for Eidim, so the Reformed Jews should also be kosher for Eidim. Why not? Oh, Rabbi famously said, no, not true. A Reformed Jew is not kosher for Eidim, even though we have nothing personally against him. Even though we have nothing against him. And we don't consider him to be wicked. But in order to be an aid, you have to be part of the system. You have to keep something. Right? Is the Reformed Jew a Russia? Not a Russia. Not a Russia at all. He's not a Russia at all. But clearly, in order to be an aid, you are plugged in to the Torah. Because who is the Torah talking to? From religious Jews, right? So the Rabbi says, Pashit, a Reformed Jew, could be the greatest guy in the world, he cannot be an aid. Impossible. He says other things. He says the whole reason why we believe Eidim is not just based on morals. It's because they believe in the Torah. But if you don't believe in the Torah, so why should you testify truthfully? I know there are plenty of honest Reformed people. It's not the issue. The issue is that the aid is the reason why we accept an aid is because he basically believes in the Torah. So again, according to now, I cannot tell you what a war went on about this. Because this is extremely important, an extremely important kula. Because we don't want reform marriages to work. We do not want reform marriages to work. I don't got to tell you why. Because the same thing here. If reform marriages to work, you're going to have a lot of mamzerim running around. Because these reform marriages, if they ever dissolve, never have a proper get. So Moshe he did in all his tshuvas, he did whatever he can to make a reform marriage. And one of his biggest theories is there's no Eidim. There were many rabbis who disagreed with Moshe. They said no. It's not true. Reform marriage, the Eidim, reform people can be Eidim. They put all this together. They're good people. It's all shoygeg. But Rabbi said not. Now, let's get back to us. How does it apply to us? It would seem, even according to Moshe, even according to Moshe, the Ethiopian Jewry are better than reform. It would seem they're better. They're better than reform. Because the reform at least had exposure. They know what a from Jew is. They had exposure. It could be it's not their fault because they weren't educated that way. And the reform are basically keeping nothing. And they don't believe in anything. Most of them don't believe in God. They don't believe in anything. Right? So, but Falashim, not Falashim, the Beta Israel, is it correct? Yes, they're not keeping a lot of Torah Shabbat Peh. But clearly, if there's anyone who we cannot have any blame for, and it's not right to say that they don't plug into the Torah at all. They have no connection to the Torah. They do keep. They daven, they keep Shabbos their way. So it's basically, in this Radbaz where he says they're Karaites, they're not kosher for Eidim. They're fine. The Karaites are Rishoyim Gemurim. But in this Radbaz, he seems to be saying, which I would have said too, they're not Karaites. We cannot say they're Rishoyim. They weren't educated. So this is not good. It comes out. It's funny. It comes out. The better they are, it's the worse for them. Because the better they are, then they're kosher Eidim. There's a better chance the Kedushin is good, and the Gittin is not good. But so what are you going to do with this? So Rabbi, all the Gedolim talk about this. And they say basically what Shammai says. And now we'll see why the Ravad Yosef, even though it sounds like Ravad Yosef was advocating respect, actually it was to the detriment. Because most of the Gedolim say, you know what? We have a sex faker here. Let's take our Ethiopian that came over. We have, are you a mamzer or not? Not for sure a mamzer. There's no reason to think that he came from a woman who got a get. They got married, Deraisa, and the get wasn't good. There's a chance. So you have one suffix. But then you have another suffix. Maybe you ain't even Jewish. Forget about the fact you're a mamzer. You ain't even Jewish. That's disrespectful. No, we're trying to help you. Because if you have a sex faker, then you can marry, right? One suffix is, maybe you're not Jewish. If you're not Jewish, you're not You can't be a mamzer if you're not Jewish. And even if you are Jewish, maybe you're not a mamzer. Maybe you are, maybe not, but it's only one. It's a sex seika. So most gedolim say you can marry an Ethiopian based on using the famous sex seika. Suffix number one is maybe he's a guy. Suffix number two is maybe he's not a mamzer. Right? Now, Rav Yosef is way ahead. He's like 10 million miles ahead of all of us. He knows all this. He knows that advocating that they're Jewish is actually to the detriment. Right? We're not going to have time, but he has other ways out of this problem. He has other ways out of this problem. Now, so here's our shaila. Our shaila is like this. We got a brisker, very stark, and he falls madly in love with an Ethiopian Jew. I don't know how that happened, right? And he comes to the Rosh Yeshiva brisk and says, no, I want to get married. Okay, very nice. But you know, at the end of the day, we're relying on a sex seika. Meaning, why are you allowed to marry, according to this formula, why are you allowed to marry this Ethiopian Jew? A sex seika. Sex seika. Again, a kohen can't marry an Ethiopian because a kohen man, because a kohen can't marry a ger, and we think that maybe he's a ger. So he comes to the Rosh Yeshiva Bris, let's say, and says, you know, I'm very firm, I'm all chumras and all stringencies, and maybe I shouldn't rely on the sex seika to lachatchila marry a person who's only kosher because sex seika. Meaning, anyone else can marry, no problem. Sex seika you can definitely rely on, no problem. And the Ethiopians can marry each other, no problem. But maybe someone who's very, very firm shouldn't rely on it. Basically, al-hakir is, should you rely on a sex seika if you don't have to? That's the question. In other words, yeshivish is sex seika at 100%. That's it. Once you have a sex seika, it's like 100% mutter. Or no, you still have a doubt, but we allow you to do it. So, the Rosh Yeshiva Brisk would say, what are you talking about? You see that woman? Yeah, I see that woman. She's pregnant. Yeah, she's pregnant. You know, she's a kohen. I'm like, okay, yeah. And she just went to Levaya. What do they got to do with Paiti China? Can a woman who is a kohenes or married to a kohen, could she go to Levaya? Say, why can't she go to Levaya? What's the problem? What's the issue here? A woman kohen allowed to go to Levayas.
She gets like someone with do shirt. Okay, she's allowed to eat.
No, a woman. That's true. That is true. But there's no din that a woman kohen, whether she herself is a kohen or married to a kohen, she could go to a basic forest. No question about that. Oh, problem is she's pregnant. Maybe the baby's a boy. The boy can't go to the basic forest. So as a woman who's pregnant with a kohen that's pregnant, a kohen that's pregnant, can she go to basic forest? So the Baal Itter famously paskins, no problem. Why no problem? Sex seika. Sex seika. Maybe it's a boy, maybe it's a girl. And maybe she'll miscarriage. Sex seika. What's sex seika? We say maybe it's a boy, maybe it's a girl. If it's a girl, if the fetus is a girl, and yeah, we're not no switcheroo, you go to basic forest. And we always know the Gemara always employs, and maybe the child won't be born. Fine. So what about nowadays? In our days, so here we are, the Kenneth is about to go to a Levaya. She's about to go to Levaya, she's pregnant, and she's like, oh, this is all wonderful. I'm allowed to go because it's sex seika, I can go. Yeah, but go do a sonogram. And nowadays you can do a sonogram. So maybe nowadays, every Keheneth should not go to a basic forest when she's pregnant, because you can figure out, what do you mean you have a sex seika? You don't know what the gender is? Go to a sonogram. Oh. But the Ramah famously says a very similar case. You buy a chicken. After you buy the chicken, it's checked in and everything, a bone is broken. But very broken. Now there's no problem with the bone being broken itself, because that doesn't make a chicken treif, right? We all know, you know treif is, right? Not the nomenclature, not the common treif. When the Gemara says treif, it means an animal has a problem that it won't live for 12 months, basically, and that animal's not kosher, right? I know we say treif all the time, but that's basically it's appropriation. We're taking it from the Gemara, which treif means to rip apart, because animals that were attacked usually won't live for 12 months because they have some type of fatal type of malady. So now, you have your chicken. You bought it, you checked it, you see a bone is broken. When a bone is broken, there's a good chance it punctured the lung. Right? Oh, so you have a sex seika. What's a sex seika? You don't know when the bone broke. You can't become a treifa after if the animal's dead, right? It's pretty bad shape as it is, right? Once the animal's shechted, you can't become a treifa. So you don't know when the bone broke. And two is, even if the bone broke while the animal was alive, maybe it didn't puncture the lung. So you're allowed to eat the animal. Says Ramah, even if you have the chicken right in front of you, you could open it up and check its lungs. You don't have to. You don't have to check the lungs. So here you are, you have a chicken. You checked it already, obviously. Oh, a bone is broken. When did it break? And when it broke, did it break the lungs? Oh, you have a sex seika. Maybe it broke after it died. And even it broke before, maybe it didn't puncture the lung. So just check it out. Just check it out. The Ramah famously says, you don't have to check it out. When the Ramah says sex seika is so strong, you don't have to go and try to undo the sex seika and try to figure out try to figure out the suffix and do some research and do due diligence. Hence, we paskin that a kehenes does not have to do a sonogram. Does not have to do a sonogram. She could go into the basic chorus and no problem. But if you did a sonogram and you know, then nothing to talk about. If you did a sonogram, then you know. But right. So same thing here. That our brisker chassid, very fit, big base. We tell him you can marry the Ethiopian, no problem. Why? It's a sex seika. And a sex seika, we don't even have to mivar. It's called you don't have to mivar. Since you don't have to mivar, that shows that it's 100%. There's no doubt. We employ sex seika 100%. Okay. So now it comes out. So Rabbi Yosef, who said that he is a for sure Jew, is in big trouble. Rabbi Yosef is in trouble because he says there is no sex seika. He says it's a for sure Jew. So we don't have what time is it? Oh, we'll just go very quickly to what he says. Basically, Rabbi Yosef says, I don't have a problem either. Why doesn't he have a problem? He says he did a lot of research into the ceremony of how the Ethiopians did their marriage. It was a whole big ceremony, a big party. But at the ceremony itself, the way the marriage was consummated was they would sort of, the kohen, they call kohen, would give them a blessing and say, you are married. There was no exchange of rings or money, nothing. Now, there was prior to the main ceremony, exchange of gifts. But that was like pre the marriage. And if you know, the whole sugi about that in Kedushin, about pre-presence, is that considered, it's called savlonis, is that considered kes Kedushin, right? Okay. I say, okay, great. And then Rabbi Yosef says, okay, so there's no kes Kedushin, right? So even if it's kosher, 1,000,000% kosher, it doesn't make a difference. Kosher Adam, doesn't make a difference. He didn't do the requisite. And then he says, now the way it worked was in that community, they would have a big party at the Kala's town, right? Then they would travel back to the Chassan's town, and they would consummate the marriage. Now, what they would do is, I mean, this is a little bit, it's a little bit weird, but the chassan would wear a special band, and they would consummate the marriage, and they would have a party there too. And during the party, they would consummate the marriage, and basically, if the chassan came out with thumbs up, the party would go on. But if he would come out and say she feels she's not a virgin, he would take off the band, and the party was a real like joy killer, a real party killer. That's what they did. I don't know why in the Gemara it's not exactly like that, but the sugi is all about that. About a chassan wakes up the next day and says, hey, she wasn't a virgin. So this is like this is standard in the. Rabbi Yosef is declaring it. We know you can marry a woman 3 ways: kesef, star, bia. So star, we said there's no way that forget star. Kesef, we said no problem because at the wedding service itself, there was no kesef. There was pre. But seemingly, there was bia. All right, obviously it was beer, else it wouldn't be right. Isn't bia? There were 8. That's the whole point. He says that they traveled to the chassan's town, and they had another party. And during the party, they went to consummate, and there were 8 of them sitting there waiting to see whether he would come out, would take off his band or not take off his headband, right? Well, we're going now that we're kosher. We're going now the kosher. If we have the kosher, we have nothing to worry about. We're going now is that side that even though Reformed Jews, even though they're wonderful people, let's say they're not they won't be kosher, but these people definitely should be kosher because they had no education and they do keep some stuff. So Rabbi said had the whole tshuva trying to figure out whether the consummation is considered part of the marriage process. And he said no. The marriage ended by the kalas. By the kalas town, the marriage is over. He says it's just like by Jews. He says it's just like by the Frum people, not the Frum times of Gemara. Just like in the times of Gemara, you found that after the marriage they would do the bia, and then if he would come out and complain. That's the same thing by the Ethiopians. The marriage is finished by the town of the kala. The bia is not considered Ma'aseh Kedushin. They think they're married already. They think they're married already. If he comes out and he starts complaining that's not a virgin and then everything is undone, yeah, that means that they dissolve the marriage. It doesn't mean that they were never married. I mean, basically, the bia is not part of the marriage process. It's post-marriage. So hence, everybody said, come out, we don't got to talk about any of this. We don't got to worry about this. We're saying here, yeah, kosher them, not kosher them. They don't even do the requisite. They don't have kesef star bia, right? So they're not married at all. Now here he says something which I found to be a little bit funny. He says, either Bas doesn't say that, the Bas says that maybe they're married. Oh, maybe the Bas didn't know what he's talking about.
He says it was.
Wait a minute. You, Rabbi Yosef said a couple of minutes ago, how could you, the answer's simple. I'm being dramatic here, but you, Rabbi Yosef said, you're going crazy here. He's very, very vehement against Rav Moshe and against Rav Herzog. How could you say they're not Jewish? Rav Bas says they're Jewish. And a couple of minutes later, he says, well, maybe Rav Bas didn't know exactly what he was talking about. He thought that they were Kedushin, but really it wasn't Kedushin. But the answer is simple. But the issue about whether they were Jewish or not, that Rav Bas says they're Jewish, we could rely on him. Rav Bas himself says, I'm not sure what's going on over there, if their Kedushin is a Kedushin, if their get is not a get. Over here, Rav Bas was like, we have to be wary. He didn't investigate. So bottom line is, Baruch Hashem, it comes out over here, halacha l'maisa, yes, the Ethiopians should be brought over, no question. Pidin Shvuyim, it's a big mitzvah. Everyone says it's a big mitzvah, no question. We have to do our utmost. Rav Moshe says, but we have to know that they're going to become gerim. Don't bring them over if they're not going to become gerim, because then you're going to cause a lot of intermarriage. But it's moot. They all become gerim. And yes, you should do Safek Geirus. Rabbi Yosef says you don't got to do Safek Geirus, but everyone says you can marry them. Any normative bacher from Brisk or Somayach could marry them, no problem. No shash Geirus, no shash mamzeris, and we have nothing to worry about at all. And that's normative. I sent someone my first year, and he sent me back a video of a Gerach Chassid marrying an Ethiopian. It was on one side you had obviously the Chassid himself obviously wasn't wearing a strymel. He comes from the Gerach family obviously, but on one side you saw Gerach Hasidim, on the other side you saw all the Ethiopians, and it was a beautiful wedding. I wish I was there. So again, they're either for sure Jewish, Safek Jewish, at least do Geirus, and you can marry them, no problem. Okay, Shekayach, everybody.